Good morning, everyone. This for all our folks who have joined us live. Today we have Dr. Rimjim Agrawal, who's been the co-founder of Brainsights AI, joining us, and she'll be sharing with us her journey, her company's journey. When she was developing the product, and she had to meet some regulatory challenges. So we'll be in today's session. We'll be learning from her what were her challenges, how did she overcome. The idea, like our previous webinars, is again to help you guys learn more about how to deal with medical devices, regulatory side of things. In our today's sessions, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Rimjim Agrawal. Dr. Rimjim, thank you so much for joining our today's session. It's a pleasure to have you on this call, and we look forward to learning from you, Rimjim.
Pleasure is mine, Varun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. As we were discussing before this call, right? So the whole intent of our the whole intention of starting EZQ also was to basically always be in a mode to help the startup community, the medical device community, learn more and more about medical device regulations, especially in country like India where the regulations are still very new, right? Medical device regulations are still very new. So with that thought process, I think it is amazing to have you on board with us in our today's session, where we can learn from someone who has started a company and has gone through the whole journey, right? Once again, thank you so much for being part of today's session and today's discussion. Okay, so with this, let me start with the round of questions that I have for you, Rimjim, today. We will start with the most basic question that I am pretty sure you might have encountered a number of time. But let me again ask you this, and get your inputs. So, how did Brain Sites happen, right? How did you guys even get into the whole story of what Brain Sight have today?
Okay, so there are two part of it. Number one is the healthcare part of it. In terms of motivation, what my motivation was in healthcare is that it is fairly complex, and I feel that biology is something which is being used in medical fraternity, but how we can explore more using the technology that we have at the moment, and how we can utilize it more doing using all the new techniques and technology which is coming in picture right now, like machine learning, so on and so forth. So drastic changes are happening in the world, and how we can leverage those in biological fields as well. So that's my
Hmm.
motivation. And I have some personal motivation as well, because there are so many people who suffer from psychiatric disorders, and
Hmm.
they don't have good facilities. Now the things are improving a lot, but 12 years before, people were not talking about mental disorders. They were not exploring as much in India
Hmm.
as in other part of the world. That's
Hmm.
why it motivated me to be in this field. My PhD was in machine learning in neuroscience for complex disorders like schizophrenia and OCD. And post that, I used the same understanding and learning in my startup as well. The second part of it, doing a startup, I got the motivation because I did not fit in other jobs. I got bored in other jobs. And I used to feel like, oh, they don't have enough flexibility, they don't have enough innovation, so on and so forth. So I felt like I should be doing something of my own. And that's when I started. Um, I got a call from Entrepreneur First, and I joined Entrepreneur First, where I met my co founder, Lina.
Oh, nice. When you talk about, as you rightly mentioned, right, the field that Brainsight is into, the whole mental health issue, right, which is huge, and with time, with all the stress and workload and all of that, we keep reading, right, it's going to get bigger and bigger, it's getting bigger and bigger, right? But the combination of mental health, which is still very niche, along with deep learning, which itself is a niche area on its own. Again, the adoption is very fast. Again, such a niche combination, right? How did you plan your journey with this kind of a nicheness that you had, right? I mean, when you typically, because people, when I see, right, they would always want to enter into something which has already been trial, and trial error. They have already done that. They know, that there is some level of success rate associated to it. But when you are entering into something which is very new, right, you don't know a lot, right? It's a completely unknown area. Uh, how was your journey with that thought process?
So actually, we started with psychiatry itself. We spoke to around 27, 30 psychiatrists, and we got to understand that the absorption of technology in psychiatry is very slow. So they used
Hmm.
to say that, okay, this technology will come 5 to 7 years from now because we are not doing MRI for brain disorders, psychiatric disorders right now, and maybe in future we will start doing it. But there need to be something very concrete for them to start doing that. However, we got a good amount of pull from neurosurgeons. So the patterns, the overall technology is to find out patterns that could be helpful in depicting the functions of the brain. We call it like traffic map of the brain. We give this analogy of traffic map of the brain, and that can be used in various purposes. It is not just useful in psychiatry. In psychiatry we are looking at something like increased activity, decreased activity in part of the brain. However, in neurosurgery it is very useful because doctors can take decisions for performing their surgeries, and that's
Hmm.
where we are right now focused. And given that we are in surgery, it increases the scrutiny of regulations on us. However, uh,
Absolutely.
given that I think we both, me and Lina, are two kind of are people who always try to find out complex problems and solve it.
Hmm.
And therefore, we thought that it would be good place. It will give us the niche as well as the expertise. We have some expertise in the team, and then we have advisors, and we were well suited to do such things. That's where we picked this problem. What we see is there was constant journey of proving and validation.
Hmm.
First we had to prove the scientific basis of the thing because we were bringing something which was in um, clinical research for a really long time. Resting state functional MRI has been in research for a really long time. We had to do certain set of validation to prove its clinical efficacy and so on and so forth, which is what I mean. We had to do around 7 to 8 validation studies for those, which also feeds into the regulatory documentation that we need to put in place.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think with what you just explained is all what I would have assumed and understood with the kind of product that you guys are building, right? And again, from where you left, right? Considering all this that you just mentioned, right, in the last few minutes, how much you had to work on validations, how much you had to work on proving your technology, right? Which basically points towards your initial focus as a startup, right, would have been towards ensuring the product development is proper, right? Yeah, you have your hold on what your product definition or what your product is supposed to do, right? when
Absolutely.
when a startup, see, for any startup, right, what I have learned is product development is the most important thing, because without a product, what are they going to do, right? In such a scenario, in such a mindset, right? When did you think, or when did you get a realization that, hey, you know what, with product development I need to also look into my regulatory side of things, right? When did that happen?
It was since very beginning. The biggest
Hmm.
struggle that I was doing personally, I did not know anything about what to do in terms of regulation. Usually, you get to know, okay, you have to do CDSU. I knew that, okay, in India, there is a body called a CDSU. Given that we are software as a medical device, now I know that we are software as a medical device. I did not
Hmm.
know that there are so many different sets of ISOs that we need to put in place before doing it, like
Hmm.
13485, 27001, so on and so forth. So those details I did not know about. I just knew that, okay, there is one body which is in India, which is CDSU. Then there is another one which is in US, which is FDA, and
Hmm.
UK is CE, and there are so many others. We will need to comply with these. The biggest challenge was to understand this whole landscape of what needs to be done after what. So I did not know I what I don't know. So
Hmm.
finding that gap itself is difficult. I think when you go and search on internet what regulations I will need to comply with, you will not get those answers very easily
Correct.
on internet.
Correct.
And that was the struggle I faced. The best way is to just get a consultation from somebody who has already done it, and they will be able to help you out. However, there are not enough material to build something on your own. I feel like that on internet it is too much of information or too little of information on some of the questions. So that's what was happening with me. However, when finally we started consulting and then going out asking other companies who have already done it, it started becoming better. At the point, we did not start it in the very beginning when we were doing a product market fit. You should have some kind of product market fit at least to start your uh, regulatory journey, because
Hmm.
that is when it worked for us very well. We
Hmm.
had some sort of product market fit, and that is when we wrote our intended use,
Hmm.
and we started digging deep on the regulatory part. Like day in and day out, we were then working on the regulatory approvals.
Makes sense. And how often have I been asked? You highlighted a very important point about understanding the markets, and how often I've come across where the founders basically ask me this question that, hey, if I get an FD approval, do I basically am I allowed to sell my product in throughout the globe? And the answer is no, right? You need to look into the specific countries regulations. You need to get their approvals, and you can then get into the market, right? Very very
Absolutely.
important point. So Rimjim, when you were exploring these things, right, when you were looking into your regulatory side of things and trying to understand, uh, were you as a founder, there is always this, and especially for a startup, right, where time and cost is of the biggest essence, right? uh, how much of that was as a founder being taken by you, or maybe your co-founder, and how much were you relying on others? And what would be your, with that approach that you had taken, what would be your advice to to the upcoming startups? How should they approach this side of things when you talk about
I
regulatory
would
side
say,
of things?
yeah, yeah. So, number one, we cannot do all the regulatory at once. I mean, as a startup, we did not have that much money to do ISO, FDA, CE all at once. It is really expensive if you go and do all those at once. So we are doing it one after the other. We have done all the ISOs which is there in India. The next part which you have asked is how much we have taken on ourselves and how much we are outsourcing it. It it is going to be all about the team. Even if in the beginning
Hmm.
somebody is helping to do a fair bit of it. Setting up can be done with the consultant's help, but taking care of it on everyday basis is required by the team. So what I mean is, it is just like coding is part of the product. It is similarly the regulation is part of the product when it is in healthcare, which means that every time we are developing a new feature, we have to think through about the risk it can be associated with, mitigation of those risks. If risk is there, then we have to create the documentation along with it. For every, for ISO practices also, for each process we have certain set of SOPs, and we have to comply to those SOPs and show evidence. So if team is not doing it on regular basis, we will not have evidences when the audit happens. And
Hmm.
more frequent than what I actually thought, we have audits. So we thought that okay, we'll have audit in once in a year, but actually audits are scattered throughout the year depending on what kind of regulatory body we are complying to. So if it will
Hmm.
be ISO 13485, we'll have one audit. Then CDSCO, we'll have another audit. Then 27001, we'll have one audit. Then HIPAA, and then others. So every 2 to 3 months, what we see right now is company is facing one or the other audit, which I feel is a good place to be in, because then we are always updated. We have all the documentation in place. Team is having that thought process in mind always when they are working. It has become part of their day-to-day job for everyone in the team. So
Got it.
that is
So
the
let me ask
beauty
you
of,
this question. Yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
I was saying, that is the beauty of regulation. If we build it on the DNA, it works really well.
Very well said. And by the way, you forgot a very important audit that you need to comply every year, which is your internal audit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell
Yeah.
me one thing, Rimjib, right? When you were explaining all of this, and it all makes so nice sense, right? End of your thought that you shared, right? Do you feel that regulatory is a burden? Like as a startup, do you see that it is a burden, or what do you think about it when you explained all of this that you just explained, right? About the audits, about making it as part of your DNA, living it as what you commit to, right? um, uh, does it come to you as a burden, or how would you say it, how would you describe it?
I would say it's a necessary evil. It feels like, oh my god, so many things are there to do. It's like a nagging mom in who is saying that do this, do that all the time. But if we won't do it, it is costing lives to people, right? If we don't do
Absolutely.
regulation, if we don't do put certain methods and processes in place, it will cost life, and that is what we don't want in healthcare. So it is a necessity at the end of the day. And if you like the complexity and you want to deal with it, I think it's not that difficult how people think about it. Once it is in the process, it becomes easier as well over time.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with you on that. With this, let me ask you one very simple and maybe again a very common question. What were your few challenges, or top challenges when it came to dealing with the whole regulatory side of things, and how do you manage those? And you can just share with us maybe top three or four that comes in your mind.
The biggest one is to make team work on it, because I may like it, I may not like it. I started going with the flow to understand what how risk management works and things like that. It became interesting to me, but the number of people in the team, it you have to make them work on all these stuff, which is painful on top of what they are already doing. So they are already coding, they are
Yeah.
already creating certain things, they are already like marketing people are working on certain things, design people are working on certain things. On top of it, it always feels like they have some extra work, and that's where it is a challenge. Like there would be resistance, and then uh, if you need to give a certain amount of time, you'll need to separate it for regulations as well. Like for any other company where regulations are not implicated, then in that case they will have maybe a full sprint just for developing a product. But in our case, we have
Hmm.
to keep certain part of the sprint to make sure that all the checks are done, which is part of regulation.
Hmm.
There are risk meetings which are recurring meeting, and people have to talk about the risk which is arising. Recurring meeting nobody likes, you know that it is such a time waste for most of the team. But for risk analysis, there has to be a recurring meeting, and we cannot go away with it.
Agreed.
So those things are that was the biggest challenge. But now we have improved. It has improved a lot. Now all the team is in that cycle, and they know that it would be required and it has to be done. So now it has become better. The second challenge was um, to navigate from one regulation body to another body,
Hmm.
because 13485 it has its own set of things which we need to fulfill. Now FDA is more stringent, and it has its own sets of things which we need to fulfill. And that is the second challenge. And third is obviously the cost which comes on a startup. Like for FDA, if we are doing 510K, or if we are doing de novo would could be a killer of the funds, I would say, because de novo will take really
Hmm.
long time. And if you have predicate device, then that's better. But still, we have to do certain set of clinical studies, which will be very cost
Hmm.
intensive. So third challenge is usually the cost. According to me, these are the top
Got it.
three difficulties. Yeah.
Got it. I think for the first challenge, Rimjim, piece of advice that I can share with you is, what has worked out well for me was always try to explain the team why they are doing what they are doing, right? Many a times what happens is, I've seen founders throwing things at the team without giving them proper clarity, right? So I think if you explain the team, that this is done because you're developing something which is going to be impacting people's life, and if you don't do it right, you're going to impact somebody's life in a negative way. I think that realization should be something that people should be aligned to, right? And I think if that
Oh,
happens, you will see the team
yeah.
adopting things on their own, right? But
Oh,
I do hear you. I see the what kind of repulsion people have when you talk about documentation, right? Because that's eventually what regulations and QMS is being defined as, right? A set of
yeah.
documents. Great.
Yeah.
um
So what we
Going
did
from what
was
you
to,
go ahead.
sorry. So what we did was to make people be the part of audits as well. Different audits, we kept different set of people who will also participate in audits. When the auditor is there, they will come for like half an hour to give them evidences, and they felt like, okay, why this question is being asked. They saw the use of what we were asking them to do before, and the questions how auditor asks also has an implication. Like he will directly ask from the perspective of risk or harm to the people. So they immediately got it. It helped us in doing so. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes so much sense. From where you were talking about cost, and you mentioned about clinical studies, right? And again, pointing towards what you guys have been developing, right? The niche product that you're developing, the deep algorithm that you're doing on creating these brain maps that helps the neurosurgeons, right? Uh, wouldn't clinical study, I would assume clinical study would be so important for you, right? At the same time, you mentioned clinical study with cost. So how do you deal, how do you go about your clinical study strategies, right? Your thoughts on that?
So, yes, clinical studies, and I would say Indian hospitals are quite efficient as compared to any other geography in terms of
Hmm.
doing clinical studies. Number one, we have a really good footfall. So, if we want to have, let's say, 50 or 30 or 100 patient in the study, it would be easier to get it from Indian hospital as compared to any other hospital outside, like given the population we have.
Hmm.
Second is also cost effectiveness. Indian hospitals are cheaper as compared to other geographies. Healthcare facilities are no less. So we have got recently to understood that in UK, in most of the hospitals, they are still using 1.5 Tesla machines for MRI.
Hmm.
However, in India, 1.5 Teslas are becoming lesser and lesser now. I mean, most of the bigger hospitals, 3 Tesla machine is to go to kind of machine right now. So there is a huge medical advancement which is there in India. India is really a good place to do clinical studies. The biggest challenge that we face is on the commencement of the study, which is
Hmm.
once you have written the study, okay, FDA or something says that XYZ should be done, it should be compared to the gold standard which is out there right now.
Hmm.
We will keep that objective, and we will also have good amount of discussion. We need to have ethical clearance, which takes anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to get. So those initial delays are definitely there. After which the biggest challenge is on ground implementation of the study. There would be a wire missing someday. There would be a logistical problem. Operationally, it is very intensive, which has proved to be a challenge in our studies. But however, we were able to do a lot of studies. We have now around 7 to 8 validation studies in various good hospitals like Manipal, St. John's, Satya Sai,
Hmm.
HCG. We were able to get ethical clearance from all these places.
Got
So,
it. So another follow-up question to the same discussion point is, so when you define your studies, right, when you define your protocols, right, because very often what I have seen is, again, from a regulatory perspective, is that your protocols, your study plans, right, that you intend to do, how well are they defined, again keeping the regulatory clearances in mind, right? One is that you want to do the study to to first understand whether the product works fine or not, right? Second is whether that study's outcome can be used as an evidence, to be shared with these regulatory bodies, right? Call it FDA, call it EU, or call it CDSCO, right? How do you then plan your studies or do you even consider or care about that, right? When you're planning these studies, that hey, when I plan my study, all these requirements of FDA or EU or CDSCOs that you guys might be primarily targeting are also being taken care of, right? How do you go about doing that? How do you ensure that?
Okay, so there are three parts that we consider. Number one, we consider what is required in FDA because it is one of the more stringent um, regulatory body. So it is better to consider what FDA would accept and what FDA will not accept. Second, considering what doctors want. We cannot eliminate what doctors would want. And if your market is not just US, if your market is India as well, then we will need to consider what Indian market want. So doctors will ask
Mhm,
question, will it work with my set of patients? How are you going to show the efficacy with Indian population? How are you going to show the outcomes for Indian population? So on. And if there is possibility of error, then how will you remove this particular error? Right. So considering all those things, uh, we need to define the objective of the study. FDA,
mhm,
what is required by Indian market and what is required by Indian regulation if India is another market that you are considering. So these were the top three things that we considered while writing our studies. And in the study, when we are defining the objective, you have option of one major objective, second one could be a smaller
mhm,
objective, or
mhm,
there are sub objectives. So you can optimize on those, like if
mhm,
there is smaller risk that you want to attend to. So we had this for functional MRI, but something else like lateralization, we created another study which was sub part of that one study itself. So you can have
mhm.
multiple outcome from one study itself.
Got it. One last question on the same topic before we move forward. Um, One more thing that keeps coming that I've seen from the regulatory perspective is this whole discussion on sample size, right? What was your sample size? How was the distribution of your sample size and things like that, right? How do you how do you recommend, how do you recommend we go about that, right? When you're defining sample sizes, let's say for your clinical studies.
Yeah, it still remains gray. For Indian population, you can show some literature who has already
Hmm.
done similar work. That is one way to go about it. Because if you are looking just for a statistical study, then you will have clear cut method to define the sample size. It is using taking one variable and that statistical formula to come out of to get the number which is required in the study. That can be used. Second, ethical clearance from the hospital itself helps because the ethical clearance from hospital, they also look into the sample size. So, for
Hmm.
example, if I'm putting a study in St. John's, their ethical committee will ask, will the sample size would be enough to what you are going to observe? And they will question on that. If they are giving a clearance, that also becomes a good way of
Hmm.
estimating. So that would be the first line. However, then FDA comes into picture. That okay, so FDA has its own set. They compare it with the predicate device. So if
Hmm.
we are comparing it with, we have one competitor in US. So if we are comparing with them, it is better to stick to the numbers that they have mentioned, and then you compare what number has come out from your statistical analysis, what number has come out from the FDA recommendations, and you try to get somewhere a good in between number. It could
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
that FDA is lesser or the local study population is lesser. So if let's say if we are getting only 50 people from St. John's and FDA says it should be 100, then you need to replicate one more study. You can also show it like, okay, it works in different populations. So instead of one hospital, do it in two hospitals. So that
Hmm.
is the strategy we took for uh, coming to our numbers.
So when you're doing all this, when you're looking at different regulatories, right, and everyone has their own way of doing things, that there might be a level of there is definitely a level of overlap between different regions, but then there is a decent amount of uniqueness that they bring on table, right? When as part of your journey, right, when you were uh, you know um, going through all these requirements and all, what were the primary regulatory requirements that you had kept in your mind? Were there specific regions that you said, okay, guys, we will target these and do things as per the requirement defined by this particular region? How did you build your strategy around it?
Our first goal was to get ISO 13485 and CDSU. So that
Hmm.
was the primary goal that we kept back then.
Hmm.
Now we are also doing our FDA. So now we are comparing more and more with the predicate device. However, back then also we compared certain things with the predicate device, and now is when we are emphasizing more. So yes, the first set of things that we considered was what would be required from CDSCO perspective and what would be required from 13485 perspective. So 13485 I am
Hmm.
saying is because it emphasizes a lot on the risk, and that is
Hmm.
where if we are saying these are the five things which is very risky, then probably we might need to show certain studies as well on top of it. However, CDSCO looks into all the possible studies and details.
Got it. Another, on the same topic, right? So there is one approach that I have seen few founders try to implement. Right? They say, hey, you know what? We will build our QMS and reg as per the most stringent. Let's say for the sake of argument, let's say FDA, right? But we will only claim smaller things first, right? Or we will only go behind smaller things first, right? Do you think this to be a good strategy? Do you think that is something you would recommend? Yes, no, your thoughts?
I would say it depends on company's strategy. So for us, it felt like if we will do smaller clearances first, we will still not be able to get a good revenue from any of the markets. So our USP needs to be regulatory approved. That was the first thought
Mhm.
process we had, and that's why
Mhm.
we went ahead and did a bigger regulatory clearance of 13485 CDSCO and FDA all thinking at once. However, for certain companies, if they already have a market pull of using the product, then they can as well go and do smaller chunks of regulatory clearance. I mean, it completely depends on what they are selling.
Makes sense. Um, I think couple of time in our discussion we have pointed out that for any startup, cost and time is of essence, right? Uh, Keeping these things, and I think it's not just for startup, it's for any company is what I believe, right? Because everybody wants to ensure that their technology is in the market in the right way, and as early as possible, right? So keeping this in mind, right? For a startup, how do you advise them to be efficient in managing the regulatory side of things and the cost and time? Because regulatory can really be a black hole, right? If not dealt properly, and it can also be one of the biggest reasons where you keep putting in money but you'll actually not get any proper outcome, right? So how do you advise the startups, right, which are working on different technologies to be more efficient in managing their cost, time, and the regulatory side of things?
Yeah, it is very easy when big companies display their regulatory dashboard, and it's fancy that you can manage your QMS system on the dashboard and stuff, and you will get driven on those things and you will feel, oh, this is a good place to be in. But actually, that is not. The whole regulation could be as well on your this Google Docs or certain set of Dropbox, something like that. Okay, and you
Hmm.
know, don't in the very initial stage when we were a very small team, and we are still not a very huge team right now. It does not require to have very fancy tools to work with it. I think it is better to have a person who can guide uh, at every step, and that is
Hmm.
what I would believe that it's a starting point for any startup rather than going for a big regulatory approval agent or fancy
Hmm.
toolboxes. Secondly, when that will keep you cost efficient. Huge difference will be there. Instead of
Hmm.
spending 5 lakhs per month on certain license, which is not useful, and just getting a consultant would be better according to me. However, Once you have done all those things, then you can think about having your own management system. And that too, I would
Hmm.
say, only once you are a certain size of the team, like 50 plus or something like that, or you have a very huge management system, which I believe ours is fairly medium size. Even though we are 30 people
Hmm.
team, we have a lot of SOPs and documents to manage, but still we are able to manage it on the Google Drive, and we don't require a particular management system as of now. As what we anticipate in 6 months down the line, we would be at a place where we can start using a tool like that. For
Got it.
a person who is having a smaller team than us, I definitely think they can save a lot of money by just doing it by their own on Google Drive, etc., etc. Yes, you will need to keep the documents in a safe place, which is regulated. Again, you need to do the validation for those places as well, and that's enough. You can save a lot of money in the beginning.
Okay. What about time?
Time is in both the ways. You will still end up giving the same amount of time. If somebody is starting to do their regulation, they should be 100% in it. I don't think that
Hmm.
if founders think, oh, my team will do regulations for me and everything will work. No, it is not going to work until both the all the co-founders, not just in our team, we are two co-founders. So until all the co-founders are completely drenched into regulation, it will not help the whole team to get their regulation done by themselves, because the thought process, the pathways are defined only when the co-founders understand, or the directors of the company understand what is required for regulation. So do it in the time when there is 100% possibility of you concentrating on regulation. Make it a quarter goal or something. If you can do it in 1 quarter, if the team is completely working on regulation, you will save more time that way. That's my opinion.
Makes sense. Um, in this whole, where AI is becoming so big, right? And the whole the maturity of software that you keep seeing, right? And at the same time, on the other end, you keep hearing one news over the other, where systems are getting hacked, and there are cyber attacks and all of that, right? Cybersecurity has played a very important role now. It's with more and more usage of AI, more and more development of the software side of things, right? Cybersecurity becomes that big, right? And again, the same thing, for a product like yours, where you guys are dealing with people's health information, right? You spoke about HIPAA, you spoke about 27001. uh, how do you guys manage the cybersecurity's requirement from your end? How do you do it at your company?
So I believe that our product is the most difficult in all the aspects. We are working with hospitals as B2B, and hospitals won't work with us until we have good cybersecurity in place.
Hmm.
However,
Hmm.
when we were doing 13485, we created the processes which will make sure that our cybersecurity is also correct. And you need not, in Indian scenario, you need not have HIPAA certification and kind of thing. But if your team is having good processes in cybersecurity at the beginning, would be good enough to start from, and then you can
Hmm.
get 27001, and so many other possibilities are there moving forward. So that's there. I mean, I'll just give you one example. There are so many cyber attacks happening on AIMS. So if we want to integrate with their system, definitely we will need to be compliant on 27001, so to at the minimum, and
Hmm.
that is required by any team. I think it's also, when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not that difficult, because for cloud providers like us, our whole system is on the cloud for customers to use, and it can be put on certain cloud which is compliant. So AWS, Azure, um, Google, all are compliant to the cybersecurity protocols. However, Indian companies, Indian server providers are not. So
Hmm.
then we have a slightly, I would say, a large cost of giving to these clouds instead of utilizing something where which is present in India. We cannot utilize just random cloud architecture.
Hmm.
So cloud provider, in that case, it will be slightly more expensive when it comes to cybersecurity in India. And yeah, so that's where, and how we had put it was to uh, another hospital which we work with, they gave us around 375 odd questions on asking how our
Yeah,
system works.
got it.
And we answered those questions and they were very happy. So they felt like, okay, we are compliant and we are doing things right. They hospitals have their own ways, and it now depends on if other company who are in healthcare, they might be B2C directly, B2C as in the patient directly, they might have lesser stringent protocols to adhere to, but then they will be handling a lot of patient information which they will need to make sure that they are doing it right.
Got it. No, the fun thing is, right, and it's always going to be the same. Is what I feel is the way that the regulations are written, right? They're never black and white, right? There is some element of spreaded black and white across the regulations, but it's always going to be gray. And the reason for that is these regulations are written not for a particular set of product or a particular type of product, right? They are basically for any medical device, which can be an SAMD, an AI algorithm, to an active device, to even an in vitro diagnostic device, right? Or different kinds within them, right? So that element of you know if I can use the word, lack of clarity will always be there in the regulations. And I think one of the ways that you be more efficient and manage these things would be to be able to uh, translate these gray requirements in a much more better way for what you are doing, right, for your needs, right? I think that's one of the things that I have learned over the last few years, that I have been trying to practice the same, right? One question, Rimjim, that I have personally for you, that I keep getting, and I would like to bounce it to you, is I, as a startup, when do I start my regulatory activity? Which phase is the right phase for me to start my regulatory activity? Your thoughts?
The same thing that I mentioned before, at the product market fit, when you know that your product is, you have got a product market fit, there is some kind of pull from the market, and now you also get the question like, what are you compliant with? That is the time when you should start. Before product market fit, you will not be able to define the whole intended use which is required for
Mm,
any regulatory body. So, for example, for us, we had to mention in intended use, you will be mentioning, okay, this is used for this purpose, and this is used by these set of people. Those are the intended use that you need to define. And until you have all the major details defined, it will be difficult to change those intended use later. So, if you don't have a product market fit, if the product can change a lot later, it will be a difficult part to get the approval. I won't say that you need to have complete UI, user experience done. That would be too late. For
mhm.
us, it was a backend toolbox, so we also did not need to do a lot of UI part to it. Usability testing is not a huge part of requirement of our product, and that's where when we got a product market fit for our algorithms and logic behind and whatever was coming out from those outputs, that is when we thought that we should be doing a regulatory approval.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Finally, Rimjim, your advice to all the startup community, all the medtech startups, what would be your advice from the perspective of how to go about with their regulatory journey?
I would say that it feels like a huge burden, but actually, it needs to be just integrated in day to day life and
Mhm.
do it 100% when you are doing it. So that's the biggest piece of advice. If you feel that you can stay away, that will not work out.
Very well
Yeah.
said. This, thank you so much, Rimjim, Dr. Rimjim. Thank you so much for your time. I think this was a great session. I think I personally learned a few things from you. I'm pretty sure our folks who have joined us in today's webinar would have also gain a lot of learning out of this session. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all the experience that you have shared with us on dealing with the regulatory challenges, which keeps getting difficult, or which keeps getting uh, uh, keeps coming up with new challenges day by day, as the regulations are also maturing and new products coming to the market. But thank you so much for your time.